The Teigin Bank incident on January 26, 1948, a man walked into a branch of Teikoku Bank in Tokyo and introduced himself as a public health official. He said he had been sent to administer preventive treatment because of a dysentery risk. 16 people inside the bank followed his instructions and drank the liquid he provided. 12 died. The case became known as the Teigin incident, from Teikoku Bank, commonly shortened to Teigin. The man who was eventually convicted was Sadamichi Hirasawa, a recognized painter. He was arrested in 1948, convicted in 1950, and sentenced to death. The Tokyo High Court upheld the verdict in 1951. The Supreme Court of Japan rejected his final appeal in 1955. Yet the sentence was never carried out. For more than 3 decades, Hirasawa remained on death row. No justice minister signed his execution order. He died in prison in 1987 at the age of 95, still legally condemned as the murderer in the Teigin Bank poisoning. The official record says Hirasawa was guilty. His lawyers, supporters, and many later researchers argued that the case was never proven with certainty. The dispute continued after his death. The crime took place in Tokyo less than 3 years after Japan's surrender in the Second World War. The city was still recovering from heavy bombing. Many neighborhoods had been destroyed. People lived with shortages, dislocation, disease risk, and the direct presence of occupation authorities. This background was important. Tokyo's medical and sanitation systems had been under pressure. Dysentery and other infectious diseases were not remote fears. In a damaged city, an official warning about contamination or disease could be treated seriously. Public authority also carried weight. A man with a medical bag, an armband, and a business card could be believed, especially if he spoke in the language of public health. A bank office was a disciplined workplace. Employees were accustomed to hierarchy, routine, and formal instruction. The killer used that environment. He did not enter the bank with visible force. He did not threaten the employees with a weapon. He made the victims believe that obedience was the correct response. The Teigin branch was located in Shinomichi, Toshima Ward, Tokyo. It was a branch of Teikoku Bank. The incident occurred shortly before or around closing time. A middle-aged man came through the entrance. Later descriptions said he was short, of medium build, and appeared to be in his late 40s or early 50s. He had short hair, a pale complexion, and some dark marks or discoloration on the right side of his face. He presented a business card. He identified himself as Dr. Jiro Yamaguchi. He said he was a public health official. He wore an armband associated with a metropolitan office and carried a medical bag. He told those inside that a dysentery case had been linked to contaminated water and that the bank employees required preventive treatment. The statement sounded plausible in the conditions of Tokyo in 1948. No one in the bank had a clear reason to reject him. The man then produced liquid preparations. Later accounts describe 2 bottles, marked in English as first drug and second drug. He explained that the medicine had to be taken in 2 doses. He also gave specific instructions on how it should be swallowed. He told them the first preparation was strong and could harm the teeth if not swallowed properly. He instructed them to drink it straight down. After 1 minute, he said, he would administer the second preparation. 16 people followed the instruction. They included bank employees and the child of one employee. The liquid was distributed into cups. The people inside the bank drank. Within moments, the first signs appeared. The taste was bitter. Then the victims began to suffer. One by one, they collapsed onto the floor. The man did not assist them. He waited while the poison took effect. He took cash and a check from the bank and left. 10 victims died at the scene. 2 more died later in hospital. 4 survived. The amount taken was not large when compared with the money available. Later accounts give the amount stolen as about 160,000 yen, along with a check worth about 17,000 yen. A larger amount of money, around 350,000 yen, was left behind on the accounting table. This point became one of the central doubts in the case. If the purpose was bank robbery, the offender had already incapacitated everyone inside. He had time to take more money. He did not. The limited theft made the motive appear unclear. The official case still treated theft as part of the crime. Critics later argued that the money may have been secondary, or that the act may not have been an ordinary robbery. The substance used was described broadly as cyanide, or a cyanide-related poison. At trial, prosecutors treated the poison as potassium cyanide. Later critics questioned whether the symptoms and timing were consistent with that conclusion. The use of 2 separate preparations also became important. The killer's method was not a simple act of handing out poison. He created a procedure. He controlled timing. He used medical language. He gave instructions. He acted as if he understood how to make the victims comply without panic. This was one reason later researchers questioned whether the real offender required specialized knowledge. The Tajin poisoning was not the first incident of its type. Investigators later connected it to 2 earlier bank incidents. The first occurred on October 14, 1947, at Yasuda Bank in Ebara, Shinagawa Ward. A man appeared using the manner of a health official and used a business card belonging to Dr. Shigeru Matsui, a real official connected with the Ministry of Health and Welfare's Department of Disease Prevention. The second occurred on January 19, 1948, at the Nakai branch of Mitsubishi Bank in Shinjuku Ward. This was 1 week before the Tajin killings. In that case, the man used the name Jiro Yamaguchi. These incidents were smaller. They did not produce the same number of deaths. But after the mass poisoning at Tajin, police treated them as part of the same pattern. The offender had tested the approach. He used official language. He used a business card. He entered a bank. He invoked disease control. He relied on the willingness of bank staff to follow orders. By the time he entered Tajin Bank on January 26, the method had been prepared. The investigation began with the false identity. The name Dr. Jiro Yamaguchi could not be verified. It was a fabricated identity. Dr. Shigeru Matsui, however, was real. Police questioned Matsui. He had an alibi and was cleared as a suspect. The problem was that one of his genuine business cards had been used by the imposter in an earlier incident. This made Matsui's card history important. Matsui told police that he had exchanged business cards with 593 people. Among those cards were 100 of the same type as the one used by the offender. Matsui still had 8 of those cards. That left 92 cards that had been given away. The police now had a limited field of inquiry. Matsui had a careful habit that helped investigators. When he received a business card from someone, he often wrote the date, time, and place of the exchange on the back of the card. This allowed police to reconstruct who might have obtained one of Matsui's cards. 62 cards were recovered, and the people who held them were cleared. Another 22 people were judged unrelated. 8 remained under examination. One of those 8 was linked to Sadamichi Hirasawa. Hirasawa was not an ordinary unknown suspect. He was an established artist. He was known for tempera and watercolor work. He had public recognition and a professional identity unrelated to medicine or chemistry. He was born in 1892. By the time of the Teijin investigation, he was in his mid-50s. He was not a public health official. He was not known as a chemical expert. He was not known to have worked in wartime biological or chemical research. Even so, the business card trail led police to him. Hirasawa admitted that he had met Dr. Matsui and exchanged business cards with him. The exchange reportedly occurred on a ferry to Hokkaido the previous summer. When police asked Hirasawa to produce Matsui's card, he could not. Hirasawa said his wallet had been stolen by a pickpocket and that the card had been inside it. Police found the explanation suspicious. They believed it was too convenient that the exact card connected to the poisoner had disappeared. Hirasawa also had difficulty giving a strong alibi for the afternoon of the Teijin poisoning. He said he had been walking in a park. No witness could confirm this clearly. A walk in a park was not an event likely to leave a record. This did not prove he was at the bank. It did mean he could not establish that he was elsewhere. The witness issue also became part of the case. 2 of the 4 survivors said Hirasawa resembled the man who had entered the bank. Police treated this as significant. Later critics argued that the identification was weak. The survivors had been poisoned and traumatized. Their opportunity to observe the man was limited. Their later identification occurred after police had already developed suspicion toward Hirasawa. Police also searched Hirasawa's home. They found a substantial amount of cash. The cash became another point against him. Investigators believed it was suspicious because it resembled the amount taken from the bank. Hirasawa did not give an explanation that satisfied police. Later supporters offered another possibility. They suggested the money may have come from drawing erotic images, an illegal and socially damaging activity at the time. If that was true, Hirasawa may have refused to disclose the source to protect his reputation and family. This explanation was never proven in a way that resolved the issue. For police, the money remained suspicious. For supporters, the money was not conclusive proof. By August 1948, several points had gathered around Hirasawa. He had received a business card linked to the investigation. He could not produce it. His alibi was weak. Some survivors identified him or said he resembled the offender. He had unexplained cash. On August 21, 1948, Sadamichi Hirasawa was arrested in Ataru. After his arrest, police interrogated him repeatedly. Later accounts state that he was questioned 62 times over 35 days. On September 27, 1948, he confessed. The confession became the strongest element of the prosecution case. It connected the circumstantial evidence to a direct admission. But Hirasawa later withdrew the confession. He said it had been forced. His lawyers said the confession was unreliable. They argued that he had been pressured during interrogation and that his mental and medical condition made his statements unsafe. The defense raised Korsakoff's psychosis. This condition is associated with chronic alcoholism and severe memory impairment. It can produce confusion, inconsistent statements, and problems with recall. Lawyers argued that Hirasawa's condition made him vulnerable during repeated questioning. The court did not accept this argument. At the time, confession still carried great weight in Japanese criminal procedure. A confession could form the center of a case, even if the defendant later withdrew it. The prosecution presented the confession alongside the business card evidence, the money, the weak alibi, and the witness identifications. Hirasawa was tried for murder and robbery. On July 24, 1950, the Tokyo District Court convicted him and sentenced him to death by hanging. His defense appealed. In September 1951, the Tokyo High Court upheld the conviction. In April 1955, the Supreme Court of Japan rejected his final appeal. The death sentence became final. From that point, Hirasawa was legally a condemned murderer. But the execution required the signature of the Justice Minister. No Justice Minister signed it. The refusal did not mean Hirasawa was acquitted. It did not change the court judgment. It did not free him. But it created an unusual situation. Japan continued to use capital punishment. Other condemned prisoners were executed. Hirasawa was not. His case remained pending in practice, even though it was final in law. The refusal of justice ministers to act became one of the major reasons the case continued to attract attention. One of the most cited examples involved Justice Minister Iseji Tanaka. Tanaka was known as a hardline minister on capital punishment. In 1967, he signed many death warrants in a single day. Yet he refused to sign Hirasawa's execution order and publicly said that he doubted Hirasawa's guilt. This point did not prove innocence. It did show that doubts reached the level of officials who were responsible for executions. The defense continued filing requests for retrial. Over the following decades, Hirasawa's legal team submitted 18 retrial requests. They also pursued petitions for clemency and other legal avenues. The main arguments remained consistent. The first was the confession. Hirasawa had confessed after weeks of interrogation. He later withdrew the confession. He said it had been coerced. Supporters argued that a withdrawn confession obtained after repeated questioning could not be treated as reliable proof in a death penalty case. The second was the eyewitness evidence. Only 4 people survived the poisoning. 2 made identifications connecting Hirasawa to the fake doctor. Critics argued that the survivors had been poisoned and shocked, and that their memories could have been affected by stress, trauma, and the investigation itself. The third was the business card. The business card trail explained why police investigated Hirasawa. It did not place him inside Taijin Bank. The missing card was suspicious, but it was not direct proof that he was the man who used the card. The fourth was the money. The cash in Hirasawa's possession looked suspicious, but the prosecution did not prove in a way that satisfied critics that it came from the Taijin robbery. If the money came from another hidden source, it weakened the argument. The fifth was the poison. This became one of the most important issues in the long debate. At trial, prosecutors argued that the poison was potassium cyanide. Later critics questioned whether the symptoms, timing, and method matched ordinary potassium cyanide poisoning. Some researchers suggested that the substance may have been acetone cyanohydrin, or a similar cyanide-related compound associated with military chemical research. The distinction mattered. Potassium cyanide was more plausible as a civilian poison. A specialized military chemical agent would point toward a different type of offender. The killer at Taijin Bank appeared to know how to administer the poison in a controlled way. He used 2 preparations. He controlled timing. He presented the process as medical treatment. He gave technical instructions. The victims obeyed because they believed he had authority. Supporters of Hirasawa argued that this method did not fit a painter with no known chemical expertise. This gave rise to one of the most controversial theories in the case, that the real offender may have been connected to Japan's wartime biological or chemical warfare programs. The theory most often involved Unit 731, and in later discussions, Naborito Laboratory. Unit 731 was part of Imperial Japan's biological and chemical warfare program. It conducted human experiments and other war crimes in occupied Asia during the war. After Japan's defeat, many details remained hidden for years. Some personnel avoided prosecution because occupation authorities wanted access to Japanese wartime research data. Naborito Laboratory was a secret Imperial Japanese Army facility involved in clandestine warfare research, including sabotage, poisons, and related techniques. The Taijin theory did not establish that Unit 731 or Naborito personnel committed the crime. No court proved this. No alternative offender was legally identified. The theory persisted because it appeared to explain parts of the case that the official version did not easily explain. It could explain the technical confidence. It could explain the 2-dose method. It could explain a poison different from ordinary potassium cyanide. It could explain why the robbery appeared secondary. It could explain why the offender behaved more like a trained operator than a common thief. Writer Saiko Matsumoto later became associated with suspicion that the true offender may have been connected to Unit 731. His works in the late 1950s and 1960s helped keep the theory alive in public discussion. Later researchers also examined the possible relevance of Naburito Laboratory. The theory remains unproven. It must be presented as a theory, not as a confirmed fact. But it became an important part of why the Tajin case did not fade. The defense also argued that Hirasawa's medical condition had been misunderstood. Hirasawa had a history of health and memory problems. His lawyers pointed to Korsakoff's psychosis and related impairment. Later discussions added claims that examinations showed brain deterioration, not consistent with ordinary aging alone. These claims were used to argue that Hirasawa's confession and inconsistent statements should have been treated with caution. Again, this did not overturn the verdict. But it added another layer of doubt. Hirasawa remained on death row year after year. He spent much of his time painting and writing. He wrote an autobiography titled My Will, the Teikoku Bank Case. He continued to maintain that he was innocent. In 1981, lawyer Makoto Endo became head of his legal team. Endo continued the campaign for retrial. In 1985, the defense raised another legal argument. It claimed that the 30-year statute of limitations for carrying out a death sentence had expired and that Hirasawa should be released. The court rejected the argument. The court held that the limitation period did not apply in that way, especially because the execution process had not begun with the signing of a death warrant. Hirasawa's health declined in the 1980s. By then, he was in his 90s. He was weak and almost blind. He was transferred for medical care. Shortly before his death, Amnesty International urged Japan to commute his sentence. On May 10, 1987, Sadamichi Hirasawa died of pneumonia in a prison hospital. He was 95 years old. He had spent more than 3 decades under sentence of death. He died without execution and without exoneration. After his death, the effort to clear his name continued. His adopted son, Teikiko Hirasawa, pursued posthumous retrial requests. Supporters argued that the death of the condemned man did not resolve the question of whether the conviction was correct. The purpose was no longer to save Hirasawa from execution, but to correct the official record. The campaign faced serious obstacles. The crime had occurred in 1948. The conviction had become final in 1955. Hirasawa had died in 1987. Many witnesses, police officers, experts, and court officials were dead. Records were incomplete. Physical evidence was limited. The defense had to rely heavily on reinterpreting the existing record under modern standards. The legal team continued to focus on confession, witness identification, poison evidence, business cards, unexplained money, and the refusal of justice ministers to sign the death warrant. In 2003, the case returned to public attention when recordings from Hirasawa's prison years were reported. In the recordings, he continued to insist that he was innocent. The recordings did not prove innocence, but supporters used them to argue that the confession had never represented Hirasawa's settled position. The defense also sought modern expert review of the eyewitness identifications. By the early 2000s and 2010s, research on memory and false identification had advanced. Supporters argued that the surviving witnesses' identifications should be re-examined because they had been made after poisoning, shock, and exposure to police investigation. Takehiko Hirasawa continued the campaign until his death. In 2013, he was found dead alone at his home. Reports said his body had been discovered nearly 1 month after his death. On December 4, 2013, the Tokyo High Court dismissed the retrial request connected to Takehiko. Some reports described this as effectively closing that stage of the case. But later efforts continued. In 2015, another retrial petition was reported. It was described as the 20th retrial effort in the Teijin case. This showed that the legal and public dispute did not end completely in 2013. In 2018, the 70th anniversary of the Teijin incident brought renewed attention to Hirasawa's prison art. A Tokyo gallery displayed 21 paintings he had made while incarcerated. The exhibition did not resolve the case. It showed how the Teijin incident had become more than a criminal file. It had become part of public debate over wrongful conviction, confession-based investigation, death penalty practice, and the unresolved legacy of wartime chemical research. The official legal record remains that Sadamichi Hirasawa was guilty. The main doubts remain the same. The confession was withdrawn. The business card trail was circumstantial. The alibi was weak, but not proof of presence. The money was suspicious, but not conclusively traced to the bank. The eyewitness identification was limited. The poison was disputed. The Unit 731 and Naborito theories were never proven, but continued to be discussed. The Justice Minister's refusal to sign the death warrant remained one of the most unusual features of the case. For supporters, the refusal suggested that the state itself was not confident enough to carry out the sentence. For the courts, the refusal did not change the conviction. For the public, it kept the case unresolved in memory. The Teijin incident is often treated as one of Japan's most famous post-war legal mysteries. It involved a mass poisoning, a false doctor, a business card investigation, a famous painter, a disputed confession, a death sentence never carried out, and a long campaign for retrial. The victims were ordinary people inside a bank at the end of a working day. They followed the instructions of a man they believed was protecting them from disease. The man used their trust to kill them. That fact is not disputed. The disputed question is whether the man convicted for the crime was truly the man who entered the bank. More than 70 years later, the official answer and the doubts around it still stand side by side. In order to understand why the Teijin employees obeyed the imposter, it is necessary to understand the conditions of Tokyo in early 1948. The war had ended in 1945, but its effects remained visible throughout the capital. Large sections of the city had been burned in air raids. Many families had lost homes. Food and fuel shortages continued. Public services had not fully recovered. The Occupation Administration and Japanese authorities were still reorganizing systems of health, policing, and public order. Disease control was a practical concern. Dysentery could spread through contaminated water or poor sanitation. In that environment, a warning from a health official was not unusual. It did not sound like a criminal trick. It sounded like the kind of instruction people had been conditioned to follow. Banks also operated under strict procedure. Employees handled cash, records, and customer documents. They were expected to obey managers and formal rules. An official visit would not necessarily be challenged, especially if the visitor carried identification and spoke confidently. The Tajin killer used these conditions precisely. His disguise did not need to be elaborate. It needed to be credible. The armband suggested official status. The medical bag suggested professional purpose. The business card gave a name and institution. The warning about dysentery gave a reason. The two bottles created the appearance of a real treatment. When the employees obeyed, they were not acting foolishly. They were responding to the visible signs of authority around them. The use of business cards was especially important. In Japanese professional life, a business card was a formal object. It introduced a person and established his role. A false card could therefore serve almost like a document of authority. The killer understood this before Tajin. The earlier incidents showed planning. At Yasuda Bank in Ebara in October 1947, the man used the name and card connection of Dr. Shigeru Matsui. The attempt did not become a mass murder, but it tested the idea that a bank could be entered through public health authority. At Mitsubishi Bank's Nakai branch in January 1948, 1 week before Tajin, the method appeared again. The name Jiro Yamaguchi was used. The offender again relied on a health-related explanation. These incidents helped police after the Tajin killings because they created a pattern. They also showed that the Tajin crime was not spontaneous. The offender had not suddenly invented the method on January 26. He had tried versions of it earlier. This made the Tajin case more difficult. The killer had prepared. He had learned what worked. After the mass poisoning, police had to explain not only who the killer was, but how he had obtained the information and confidence to carry out the act. The business card investigation was logical. The police had a real card tied to a real official. Matsui could be cleared by alibi, but his card history could be traced. The narrowing from 593 exchanges to 92 possible cards, then to 8 unresolved cases, gave investigators a structured path. This type of investigation can be powerful. It can also create tunnel vision. Once Hirasawa appeared among the 8, each ambiguous fact around him was treated as more suspicious. The missing card looked incriminating. The lost wallet explanation looked too convenient. The weak alibi became important. The money became important. The witness resemblance became important. Critics later argued that this was how the case developed. Hirasawa became a suspect because of the card trail, and other facts were then interpreted in a way that supported that suspicion. Police viewed the situation differently. From their perspective, several independent facts pointed toward him. A missing card linked to the offender, unexplained money, weak alibi, and witness identification were not random. The arrest followed this accumulation of suspicion. The interrogation phase then became decisive. 62 sessions over 35 days created an environment in which pressure was unavoidable. Even if no physical violence was proven in every detail, repeated interrogation over that period would place heavy stress on a suspect. Hirasawa's later claim that he had been forced to confess became a central argument for supporters. The confession allowed the prosecution to connect the evidence into a complete story. Without it, the case was mainly circumstantial. With it, the prosecution could say that the suspect himself had admitted the crime. The problem was that the confession did not remain stable. Hirasawa withdrew it. In many legal systems, a withdrawn confession still can be used if a court finds it voluntary and supported by other evidence. The Tokyo court accepted the prosecution case. But outside the courtroom, the withdrawal made the confession a permanent source of doubt. The defense's medical argument also mattered. Korsakov's psychosis was not a simple claim that Hirasawa was mad. It was an argument about memory and reliability. If a suspect had serious memory impairment, repeated interrogation could produce statements that did not reflect actual memory. This was especially important if investigators supplied details during questioning. The courts did not accept the defense position, but later understanding of false confessions made the issue appear more serious. False confessions are now known to occur under pressure, especially when suspects are isolated, exhausted, confused, or believe confession will end interrogation. Hirasawa's case became one of the older Japanese cases later discussed in this light. The eyewitness evidence was also reconsidered over time. The survivors were the only people who had seen the killer and lived. Their testimony mattered, but they had been poisoned. They had been in a traumatic situation. They had seen the man under conditions where they believed he was a doctor, not a criminal. Their memory of his face was formed before they understood the danger. Later critics argued that such identification should be treated with caution. The prosecution saw it differently. The survivors had direct contact with the offender. If two of them identified Hirasawa or said he resembled the man, that supported the case. Both positions explain why the issue remained contested. The money issue also remained unresolved. A large amount of cash in the home of a suspect in a bank robbery is naturally suspicious. But suspicion is not the same as proof. The defense's alternative explanation involving illegal erotic drawings was plausible enough to keep the issue open, but not proven enough to remove suspicion completely. The poison issue created the largest broader theory. If the poison was ordinary potassium cyanide, a civilian culprit was easier to imagine. If the poison was a compound connected to military research, then the official case became less convincing. The Tajin killer handled the poison with confidence. He controlled the victim's behavior. He used two preparations. He instructed them to wait between doses. The victims did not immediately recognize the danger. This appeared to some researchers like a method derived from technical training. The connection to Unit 731 and Naborito Laboratory emerged from this point. Unit 731 had conducted biological and chemical warfare experiments. Naborito Laboratory had been involved in secret warfare research. Both represented areas of wartime knowledge that remained sensitive after 1945. After the war, American occupation authorities had reasons to control or conceal information about Japanese biological warfare research. This created an atmosphere in which later researchers suspected that some wartime personnel could have escaped scrutiny. The Taijin theory says that someone connected to such research may have committed the poisoning, and that Hirasawa may have been a convenient suspect. This theory has never been legally proven. It cannot be treated as established fact. It remains important because it explains why the case moved beyond an ordinary murder trial into historical debate. A bank robbery normally does not require discussion of secret wartime laboratories. The Taijin case did. The death penalty issue added another layer. Japan's justice ministers did not abolish executions during Hirasawa's time on death row. Other prisoners were hanged. This means Hirasawa's non-execution was not simply the result of general opposition to capital punishment. Something about his file made ministers hesitate. This did not equal legal innocence. Ministers may avoid signing for many reasons, including age, health, public controversy, or legal uncertainty. But the public statement by Iseji Tanaka that he doubted Hirasawa's guilt became especially significant because Tanaka otherwise approved executions. The contradiction remained for decades. The court said Hirasawa was guilty. The executive branch did not carry out the sentence. Hirasawa remained alive but imprisoned. For supporters, this showed the state knew the case was doubtful. For prosecutors and courts, it changed nothing. For the public, it kept the case alive. During his long imprisonment, Hirasawa continued producing artwork. His paintings later became part of the public memory of the case. Supporters displayed his works to draw attention to his situation. Time magazine reported in the 1960s that supporters had arranged an exhibition of his tempera paintings while he was still on death row. These exhibitions did not prove innocence. They were a way of keeping the case visible. Hirasawa's supporters argued that a recognized artist had been trapped by a flawed investigation. Others saw him as a convicted mass murderer whose talent did not change the verdict. After his death, art again became part of the campaign. The 2018 exhibition of 21 prison paintings, held for the 70th anniversary, presented Hirasawa as both an artist and a condemned man whose case remained disputed. The posthumous legal campaign continued because Japan allows certain efforts to challenge convictions after death, though the process is difficult. Takehiko Hirasawa, the adopted son, became the key family figure in the effort. The 2013 dismissal after Takehiko's death was a major setback. It ended the petition connected to him, but it did not erase all later attempts. The 2015 petition showed that some supporters and descendants continued to seek a legal reconsideration. As of later public discussion, Hirasawa's conviction had not been overturned. The official record remains. The doubts remain. The Taijin incident therefore stands as a case with two parallel histories. One is legal history. In that history, Hirasawa was arrested, tried, convicted, sentenced to death, and remained condemned until death. The other is public and historical debate. In that history, the case remains unresolved because of the confession, the witness evidence, the money, the poison, the business card trail, the execution refusal, and the possible wartime connection. A full account has to include both. It should not present Hirasawa as proven innocent. It should not ignore the weaknesses in the conviction. It should state the facts clearly. The killer entered the bank using a false medical identity. The victims drank because they trusted him. 12 people died. The stolen amount was limited. Police followed a business card trail. Hirasawa became a suspect. He confessed after long interrogation. He withdrew the confession. He was convicted and sentenced to death. The sentence was upheld. The execution order was never signed. He died in prison. Posthumous efforts to clear his name continued. This is why the case remains one of Japan's most discussed post-war criminal cases. The central issue is not whether the crime happened. It did. The central issue is whether the courts convicted the correct man. The official answer remains yes. The dispute remains open in public discussion. The first earlier incident at Yasuda Bank showed that a bank could be approached under a medical pretext. The offender did not need a large organization or elaborate equipment. He needed a plausible official story. The second incident at Mitsubishi Bank showed that the same method could be repeated. It occurred only 1 week before Teijin. This was close enough to suggest rehearsal. The Teijin poisoning was therefore not simply a single sudden act. It was the successful version of an approach that had already been tried. The fake name Jiro Yamaguchi was important because it combined with the real identity of Matsui to confuse the investigation. One name was false. One card trail was real. Police had to separate the false medical identity from the real public health official, whose card had been misused. Matsui's role was not as a suspect after his alibi was confirmed. His role was as the origin of the business card chain. The number 593 became important because it showed the scale of the problem. A business card can move through many hands. It can be lost, stolen, copied, or passed to another person. Police narrowed the field, but narrowing a field is not the same as identifying a killer. This is one of the reasons the card evidence remained disputed. The same logic applies to the missing wallet. If Hirasawa truly lost his wallet, the missing card was not incriminating. If he lied, the missing card was very incriminating. The problem was that the truth could not be established with certainty. The alibi problem had the same structure. A park walk was weak as an alibi. It did not prove innocence. But a weak alibi does not prove guilt. It only fails to remove suspicion. The money issue was stronger for police, but still incomplete. Unexplained cash in a murder-robbery case is suspicious. But without direct tracing, it remained a supporting point rather than final proof. The witness identification was emotionally powerful but legally vulnerable. The survivors had seen the killer and nearly died. Their identification carried human weight. But trauma, poisoning and later police influence could affect memory. The confession combined these pieces. That is why it was decisive. Without the confession, the prosecution case had gaps. With the confession, the gap seemed closed. The later dispute over false confession, therefore, threatened the entire conviction. Hirasawa's confession was not a minor piece of evidence. It was the element that made the circumstantial case appear complete. When he withdrew it, the case remained legally strong enough for conviction but historically vulnerable. The trial court accepted the prosecution case in 1950. The appellate courts confirmed it. The Supreme Court's 1955 rejection made the sentence final. The legal system had spoken, but the later conduct of the justice ministers showed that legal finality and administrative action were different. A death sentence in Japan required an execution order. The justice minister's signature was not a formality in practice. It involved responsibility for the final act. In Hirasawa's case, that responsibility was avoided for decades. The refusal allowed both sides to continue their arguments. Supporters could say the ministers knew the case was doubtful. Officials could say the conviction remained valid and no retrial had been granted. The result was a long stalemate. Hirasawa lived under sentence of death. The victims' families had a conviction, but not final execution. The public had a case that would not close. The Unit 731 theory, strengthened after more information about Japan's wartime programs became public. During the early post-war years, knowledge of Unit 731 was limited. Later, as evidence of biological warfare experiments became better known, the possibility of a wartime specialist became easier for the public to imagine. This does not mean the theory is proven. It means the historical context changed. What might have seemed implausible in 1950 became more discussable later. The Naborito laboratory theory also fits this pattern. Naborito was associated with secret military research. If someone trained there had access to poisons and techniques of deception, that person would match some aspects of the Teijin method better than an ordinary artist. Again, no court established this. The theory remains an explanation for doubt, not a replacement verdict. The toxicology issue remains difficult because surviving evidence and reports from the time are limited. Modern reanalysis is constrained by what was preserved. Some claims about acetone cyanohydrin are based on later interpretation rather than a new definitive test. A careful account should therefore say that the poison became disputed, not that a specific alternative poison was conclusively proven. The same caution applies to Hirasawa's medical condition. His lawyers raised Korsakoff's psychosis. Later supporters discussed brain damage and memory impairment. These points may explain unreliable statements. They do not by themselves prove that he was not at the bank. They support doubt about the confession. They do not replace the need for evidence of the real offender. The legal system did not grant a retrial because it did not find the new argument sufficient. That is the official reason the conviction remained. Supporters argued that the standard for retrial was too high and that the system gave too much weight to the original verdict. This is why the case is often discussed alongside other Japanese wrongful conviction controversies. It raises questions about confession reliance, police interrogation, eyewitness reliability, and capital punishment. The Tajin incident also differs from many wrongful conviction debates because the crime itself was extraordinary. A mass poisoning inside a bank by a false doctor was unusual. The unusual method allowed unusual theories to persist. If the crime had been a conventional robbery, the debate might have been narrower. Because the crime involved public health disguise, poison, and two-dose administration, it naturally led to questions about specialized knowledge. The amount of money taken also kept the motive issue alive. A robber who kills 12 people for a modest sum and leaves larger cash behind does not fit an ordinary pattern. This does not mean it is impossible. Criminals can make mistakes or act irrationally. But in Tajin, the offender otherwise appeared controlled. That made the limited theft harder to explain. Supporters used this to argue that robbery may have been a cover. Prosecutors treated robbery as the motive and the theft as evidence. The court accepted the prosecution theory. The public debate did not. The case also reflects the authority culture of the period. The victims obeyed because they believed the man was official. The investigation then relied on official processes. The courts relied heavily on the confession. The justice ministers refused to act, but without overturning the system's conclusion. At each stage, authority shaped the outcome. The killer used it. Police used it. Courts used it. Ministers avoided using it fully. This is not a literary point. It is a factual pattern in the case. The victims were not careless. They were deceived by someone who knew how to appear legitimate. The police were not acting without evidence. They had a trail that led to a suspect. The courts were not acting without a case. They had a confession and supporting circumstances. The supporters were not inventing doubt. They had multiple weaknesses to point to. This is why the case remains difficult. It is not empty suspicion. It is also not a simple acquittal story. The best factual treatment is to present the official case and the doubts separately. The official case: Hirasawa had received a relevant business card and could not produce it. He had no confirmed alibi. He had unexplained cash. Survivors identified him or said he resembled the offender. He confessed. The courts convicted him. The doubts: the card was circumstantial. The alibi failure was not proof. The money may have had another source. The identifications were limited. The confession was withdrawn and allegedly coerced. His medical condition may have affected reliability. The poison and method may have required expertise. The robbery motive was weak. Justice ministers refused to execute him. Both lists are necessary. Removing either list distorts the case. After Hirasawa's death, legal efforts became harder but not impossible. Takiko's campaign kept the matter alive for another generation. The 2003 recordings gave the public a direct reminder that Hirasawa had continued claiming innocence. The 2013 dismissal showed the limits of the posthumous campaign. The 2015 petition showed that the dispute still had supporters. The 2018 exhibition showed that the public memory of the case remained active. By then, the Tajin incident had passed through several phases. First, it was a mass murder investigation. Second, it was a criminal trial. Third, it was a death row controversy. Fourth, it was a wrongful conviction campaign. Fifth, it became a historical debate about post-war Japan. Each phase added material. The original newspaper reader in 1948 saw a shocking poisoning. The courtroom in 1950 saw a suspect and a confession. The public in the 1960s saw a condemned man who was not being executed. The lawyers in the 1980s saw a death row inmate who might die before retrial. The supporters after 1987 saw a dead man whose name they still wanted to clear. The later researchers saw a case connected to broader issues of science, war, and justice. The case begins with a man entering a bank. It continues with victims drinking poison because they believed him. It moves to a business card trail. It narrows to an artist. It produces a confession. It produces a death sentence. It produces decades of hesitation. It ends legally with a condemned man dying in prison. It does not end historically because the dispute continues. The number of victims remains central. 12 people died. They did not die in combat. They did not die in an accident. They died inside a workplace after following instructions from a man who claimed medical authority. This fact explains why the case had such force in Japan. It was not only a crime against individuals. It was a crime against ordinary trust. The child victim made the case even more disturbing. The child had no role in bank operations. The presence of a child at the scene showed how ordinary the setting was. The killer did not change his plan because a child was present. The survivors also became part of the legal case. Their testimony helped convict Hirasawa, but their condition during the event became part of the later challenge. The 4 survivors were both witnesses and victims. That dual role made their evidence powerful and problematic. A survivor of a poisoning has direct experience, but also trauma. Later courts and researchers often treat such evidence carefully. In 1950, the same caution was not as developed. This change in standards is one reason older convictions become controversial. The Tajin case is not the only Japanese case where confession and witness evidence were later questioned. But it is one of the most famous because the crime was severe and the sentence was death. The death penalty raises the standard of concern. If a conviction is doubtful, imprisonment is serious. Execution is irreversible. In Hirasawa's case, the execution never occurred, but the threat remained for decades. A person living under death sentence lives with the possibility that the order may be signed. Hirasawa spent more than 30 years in that position. His supporters argued that this was a form of prolonged punishment created by uncertainty. The state did not agree to free him. The state did not execute him. The state kept the conviction intact. When Hirasawa died of pneumonia, the practical issue of execution disappeared. But the conviction remained attached to his name. This is why the posthumous campaign mattered to supporters. They were not trying to change a sentence that could no longer be carried out. They were trying to change history. Japanese courts did not grant that relief. The conviction remains official. The public dispute remains unofficial but persistent. Hirasawa was convicted. He was not executed. The evidence remains disputed. The alternative theories remain unproven. The victims remain the confirmed center of the case. Sadamichi Hirasawa died as a condemned man. The state never carried out the sentence. The Taijin Bank murders remain one of Japan's most debated post-war cases. There were also practical reasons why the crime scene itself caused confusion. The poison acted quickly, but not all victims died at once. Some died at the bank, while others died after being taken to hospital. This created immediate medical and investigative pressure. Police had to secure a bank crime scene, identify the poison, question survivors, and trace the imposter before evidence disappeared. The killer had chosen a time that helped him. Near closing time, the bank had fewer outsiders entering and leaving. The staff could be gathered more easily. Money from the day was still present. The situation allowed the man to address the employees as a group. He also selected an explanation that required group treatment. If he had claimed that only one person needed medicine, others might have watched more carefully. By claiming a public health risk, he made collective treatment appear logical. The instruction to drink in a specific way also mattered. It prevented the employees from tasting, testing, or questioning the liquid for too long. The false doctor controlled both the action and the timing. The 1-minute interval between doses became one of the reasons later researchers focused on method. A common poisoner might simply administer poison. This offender created a sequence. That sequence looked medical. It also may have been designed to delay recognition of the danger until the victims were already affected. The second dose may have been unnecessary, incomplete, or part of the deception. Accounts vary in how they interpret the two preparations. The key point is that the offender made the victims believe he was following a professional procedure. The bitter taste did not immediately expose the crime because medicine can taste bitter. The victims had been warned that the preparation was strong. The warning turned a possible sign of danger into something expected. This detail shows how carefully the deception worked. Every part of the act had an explanation inside the false medical story. The business card explained who he was. The armband explained his authority. The bag explained his equipment. The dysentery story explained why he was there. The 2 bottles explained the procedure. The warning about tooth enamel explained the taste and swallowing method. The 1-minute interval explained the timing. The employees were not given a clear moment to doubt him until the poison had already taken effect. After the poisonings, the offender's decision to take only a limited amount of money remained difficult to interpret. He may have feared discovery. He may have had a specific amount in mind. He may have wanted the crime to appear as robbery. He may have been interrupted by the condition of the victims. None of these explanations can be proven. Police followed the practical evidence available to them. The business card trail was concrete. The name Jiro Yamaguchi was not. Matsui was real. His cards were real. The 92 possible holders of cards gave police a working list. In a case where the offender had vanished, this was a major investigative advantage. At the same time, a business card is a movable object. It can be lost, stolen, copied, or given to another person. The mere fact that Hirasawa once received a card from Matsui did not prove that he was the man who later used a related card in a bank. This distinction became central to the dispute. Police believed the card connected Hirasawa to the offender. Supporters believed it connected him only to Matsui. The missing wallet claim could be interpreted both ways. An innocent man might lose a wallet. A guilty man might invent a lost wallet. Police chose the second interpretation. The weak alibi also worked in the same way. Many innocent people cannot prove what they were doing on an ordinary afternoon. But in a murder case, the inability to prove an alibi can be damaging if other evidence already points toward the person. Hirasawa's background as an artist also cut both ways. For supporters, it made him an unlikely poisoner. He had no known training in medicine, toxicology, or wartime chemical operations. For police, a lack of known training did not make the crime impossible. A determined person can learn enough to use poison. A disguise can be copied. A criminal does not need to be a professional to imitate official behavior. The trial court accepted the latter view. Later public debate often favored the former. This difference shows why the case remains difficult. It depends partly on what level of expertise one believes the crime required. If the crime required only boldness, a stolen or copied card, and access to cyanide, Hirasawa remains plausible. If the crime required specialist poison knowledge and a practiced medical-style method, Hirasawa becomes less plausible. The courts did not need to solve every later historical theory. They needed to decide whether the evidence before them proved guilt. They decided it did. The later critics judged the case under broader questions. They asked whether the verdict would satisfy later standards of forensic evidence, interrogation reliability, and eyewitness identification. That is a different question. The answer is less certain. The 18 retrial requests show how persistent the challenge became. Filing a retrial request is not proof of innocence. Many convicted people seek retrial. What made Hirasawa unusual was the combination of the retrial campaign with the refusal to execute. Had the justice ministers signed the warrant soon after 1955, Hirasawa would have been executed, and the case may have entered history differently. Instead, the state left him alive. Each passing year allowed new doubt, new research, and new public attention. Time changed the case. In the late 1940s, the immediate issue was a mass murder in a bank. In the 1950s, the issue was whether the courts had convicted the right man. In the 1960s, the issue expanded to include public doubt and the death warrant. In the 1970s and 1980s, the issue became the long imprisonment of an elderly death row inmate. After 1987, the issue became whether a dead man could still be cleared. By the 2000s and later, the issue included false confession research, witness memory, wartime secrecy, and historical responsibility. This is why the Tajin incident lasted in public discussion. The case kept changing as the context around it changed. Hirasawa's age at death also became part of the story. He was 95. He had outlived many of the officials, witnesses, and lawyers connected to the original case. He died not by hanging but by illness. The death did not create legal closure. It removed the practical possibility of execution, but it did not answer the question of guilt. The legal system generally values finality. Once appeals are exhausted, a judgment is expected to stand unless new evidence meets a strict standard. Hirasawa's supporters argued that strict finality protected a possibly wrong verdict. The courts maintained the conviction. The conflict between finality and correction is common in wrongful conviction cases. The Tajin case became a prominent Japanese example because the sentence was death and the doubts were numerous. The 2003 prison recordings did not supply forensic proof. They mattered because they showed consistency in Hirasawa's later denial. For supporters, they weakened the idea that his confession had been a genuine acceptance of guilt. For skeptics, they were only another denial by a convicted man. The 2013 death of Takehiko Hirasawa was significant because posthumous litigation often depends on someone with legal standing and persistence. When he died, the pending effort lost its central family figure. The Tokyo High Court's dismissal followed, but the 2015 petition showed that others still tried to continue. The 2018 exhibition of prison paintings showed that the cultural memory of the case remained active. Art exhibitions are not legal evidence. But in this case, they kept public attention on the man behind the legal file. That public attention matters because old cases survive only when someone continues to examine them. In the Tajin incident, the continued attention came from lawyers, writers, artists, historians, journalists, family members, and legal reform advocates. Each group focused on a different part of the case. Lawyers focused on the conviction. Writers focused on the mystery. Historians focused on post-war Japan and wartime research. Death penalty opponents focused on the unsigned warrant. Forensic critics focused on the poison. Wrongful conviction advocates focused on confession and eyewitness evidence. This wide interest helped keep the case alive. It also created a risk of overstatement. Some accounts present Hirasawa as certainly innocent. Others present him simply as the convicted killer. A careful account must avoid both extremes. The facts allow strong doubt. They do not provide final proof of another perpetrator. This is why the article should remain factual. The crime can be described in detail. The official case can be stated. The doubts can be listed. The theories can be explained as theories. The legal outcome can be stated without claiming that it resolved every question. For a long-form narration, the case can be expanded through chronology rather than dramatization. There is no need to invent the killer's thoughts, the victim's emotions, or Hirasawa's private feelings. The known facts are enough. The chronology is strong. First came a damaged Tokyo after war. Then came the two smaller bank incidents. Then came the Tajin poisoning. Then came the business card investigation. Then came Hirasawa. Then came interrogation and confession. Then came conviction. Then came decades of death row. Then came death in prison. Then came posthumous retrial efforts. This sequence carries the story without fiction. The Tajin case also shows how a small object can shape a major investigation. The business card was ordinary, yet it became the main path from an unknown false doctor to a named suspect. If Matsui had not kept careful records, police might have had no clear route to Hirasawa. If Hirasawa had produced the card, suspicion might have changed. If the card had been found in another person's possession, the case might have gone elsewhere. The importance of the card makes the investigation both logical and fragile. Logical because it gave police a trail. Fragile because the trail depended on assumptions about possession and use. The same can be said of the confession. It was powerful because it came from the suspect. It was fragile because it was withdrawn and obtained after repeated interrogation. The same can be said of the poison. It was central because it was the murder weapon. It was disputed because later analysis questioned what it was and who could have used it. The Tajin incident, therefore, remains a case built from important but contested pieces. The public debate did not invent those contestations. They came from the record itself. The final legal answer remains simple. Sadamichi Hirasawa was convicted. The final historical assessment remains complex. The case has never fully satisfied the questions raised by its own evidence.